Hello and welcome to another video of Rants and Yarn with two best friends. Stefanie again is busy, so she'll come back in another video when she's able. And today's article I have for you is Leave No Soldier Behind, the Unsolved Mystery of the Soldier Who Died in the Watchtower. 1. The Gun Tower. And here's a picture of the gun tower. I know it's hard to see because it's black and white, but I'll have it for you in the thumbnail and you can probably see it better. In the morning of May 11th, 2008, a U.S. Army private second class named Matthew Warren Brown died of a single gunshot wound to the head while manning a watchtower at a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Brown was 20 years old. He was skinny, all-American kid, a bit aimless but affable and unassuming. He was a good boy. You could see it in his face. At his funeral back home in Pennsylvania, some 200 people showed up. It's sad that he was just watching the tower and all of a sudden he got gunned down. He didn't have any time to respond to that all of a sudden, because it's hard if you're just there by yourself. You don't know where it's coming from. You can't. If you avoid the hit, then you can radio for help. But if you just get hit, you get hit unless you can radio for help, or maybe it was a fatal gunshot. Who knows? Because I guess they're not like police who wear vests, or maybe he got hit where he wasn't wearing a vest, but. Everybody, in my opinion, should wear a protective vest that protects them from bullets. Bulletproof vest. If they're working in that line of duty. In the aftermath of Brown's death, Army investigators created file about the circumstances. The bullet that killed him was fired from his own weapon, an M4 carabine. Okay! It's either he shot himself, or something had to happen where that weapon was used to shoot him. He was working the 6 a.m. shift alone in the watchtower by the fortified main gate on the base. Okay, 6 a.m. is not that bad because everybody will soon wake up and start their meandering around there. But until then, if you're alone, you got nobody, then you have to be more precautionary, and things could happen. It's scary. But there should always be someone you can radio for help, There should always be a way to radio for help. The tower was known as the Gun Tower. It was made of concrete and looked medieval when viewed from the outside. Yes, I agree, it does look medieval. It was 3 stories tall. On the second and third floor it had openings covered with 2-piece plexiglass windows, some of which had broken off and been left lying in shards on the floor. The forward operating base was known as FOB Asdabad, after a beleaguered provincial capital up the road. It was a former Soviet stronghold, a grim-looking installation on the shelf above a vast river in the Hindu Kush Mountains near the border with Pakistan. It had 2 concrete walls. The outer FOB contained a helicopter landing zone, munitions and fuel depots, vehicle parking, barracks for Afghan army units, and a bazaar where locals were allowed to sell their goods to the Americans stationed there. The inner FOB contained living quarters and offices for hundreds of soldiers and civilian contractors, and a small detention center used to hold suspected insurgents before shipping them for processing elsewhere. So it was like a whole community within itself. And it looks like any army compound. Matthew Brown had been plucked from an artillery unit in a distant fire base and assigned to Asadabad to work at the detention center. It houses people, but it's also like some sort of detention center too. Like the other low-ranking soldiers there, Part of his job was to stand guard in the towers. It was a dull duty. On the morning in question, staying alert was the problem for Brown. Maybe he was so tired it was hard for him to keep awake. That's when things can go wrong, of course. Soon after he began his shift, the sergeant of the guard, and at least they're investigating it, trying to figure it out, but it's hard when there's no one else there to tell you what happened, and evidence is hard to come by, you know. Soon after he began his shift, the sergeant of the guard, the man responsible for the soldiers manning the towers and gates, tried to raise him on the radio. Only after the third attempt did Brown respond intelligibly. Well, I guess he was kind of tired to be out of it. At least there's someone checking on him to see if everything's cool, you know. That's good. The sergeant went to the chow hall to assemble breakfast plates for his crew, then drove to the gun tower, arriving around 6:25 a.m. He grabbed a Gatorade and Brown's breakfast and shouted up the staircase that he was coming. He heard nothing in response. At least this guy is getting food and Gatorade. So I guess there are people who check on him and see that he's okay, you know. At least, you know. But I guess, lo and behold, something happened in between that time. In between the checking on him time and him being... something happening to him. When he got to the top, he found Brown seated on a high bench at an elevated gun table, but slumped over and leaning against the wall and plexiglass window to his left. At first thought Brown was sleeping. Then he thought Brown had a bloody nose. Then he saw blood and brain matter on the ground. Brain matter? So his brain was splattered to smithereens. That's not a... well, if they shoot you here, sometimes it could happen. But mostly if they shoot you back here. But I mean, that's scary to see brains splattered. When they say that, oh my gosh. He tapped Brown as if to wake him. He set the food and Gatorade on the table. He tapped Brown as if to wake him and felt his neck for a pulse. Now he saw blood and brain matter on the wall and ceiling. Brown was still alive. He was breathing shallowly and making gurgling noise. His weapon was standing on the floor, muzzle up, with a strap loosely around his left leg. A bullet casing lay nearby. Oh my. He didn't make it, but maybe there was a slight chance he could. But I mean, maybe he fell asleep and his leg got wrapped around his gun holster. His gun, the string that he uses to, you know, yeah, the strap. Yeah, maybe the strap caught around his leg when he fell asleep or something, and it hit him. It hit him, but it's weird how that could have happened. Probably would have hit him somewhere else, not directly to his head. The sergeant was not an investigator, expected to withhold judgment. Yeah, if you're not an investigator, then you're not going to make judgment on your own. You can make your own judgment, but you're not allowed to, call it. He assumed the obvious, that Brown had shot himself. Yeah, like I said, that could be the obvious, that he shot himself, maybe intentionally or not, who knows. He radioed to the base office and the medical team, but got no response from either. Finally, he got through to some civilian security contractors working for a company called Cobra. He told them there was an emergency in the gun tower and asked them to send help. By now, Brown had stopped breathing. A man from Cobra had appeared, felt him for a pulse, and said, "Yeah, he's dead." A few minutes later, a doctor arrived and made the finding formal. Of course. In that situation, when your brains are blown out, there's not enough time to save them. There's really this much time to save the person. You know, by the time you radio for help, by the time help comes, it's a very minuscule chance of them being able to survive until help arrives. It's just scary. It's just scary to watch that when you're someone looking at the situation. And here's a picture. It's 2 weeks before he died. Brown told his mother he might not return alive. Private fear. It's, yeah, Private Brown. I think it's a private, so it's Private Brown. Trying to get you a good close picture, but I'll have it posted in the link. I'll have it posted in the link below. Yeah, I'll have it posted after the video so you guys can all get a clear more picture of him. But it's sad what happened. Him calling his mother, telling his mother, so he knew something was going to happen. Whether he killed himself or whether someone else did, he knew. He knew that was the end for him. The doctor was an Army major named Matthew Mayfield. A medic who accompanied him tilted Brown upright on the bench so his wounds could be examined. The injury wound was a hole in his front right temple. It was a contact wound. Ah, so he could have shot himself. Okay. Of the sort made with a muzzle is placed directly against the skin. The exit wound was a larger hole in the left side of Brown's head. So it went this way and that way. Oh, that's why there were his brain spilled out, because it entered his head and the impact caused it to go right through his head. Wow. Anyone survives from that? Just wow. Mayfield laid Brown into an approximation of the original position against the wall for photographic purposes. Later, someone else got him upright again and strapped him to the bench to keep him from sliding under the table. Now they're investigating to see how this could have happened. And I guess we'll find out why it's not solved, but they're trying to figure it out as of the current moment as I'm reading it. Far to the west, at the Bagram Air Base, the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, promised to send investigators. Meanwhile, all sorts of people milled around in the gun tower, disturbing the scene and contaminating evidence. Really? Those were the only people that should have been up there. The doctor and the person that found him. Nobody else should be up there messing up the scene. Until examiners can get there and see for themselves what happened and they could make their own investigative report, you know? The sole person there with knowledge of normal procedure in such circumstances, a National Guard lieutenant named Brad Faust, who in civilian life was a Virginia police officer, tried to get people to move away from the scene, but he had no authority over the situation and grew so frustrated that he left to interview soldiers nearby. By noon, when word came that the CID investigators had not yet boarded a helicopter in Bagram, Brown was placed into a rubberized body bag, carried down the stairs, loaded into an ambulance, and driven to the coolness of the women's shower room in the inner FOB, where he laid to rest. Guards were placed outside. At least, you know, well, who knows how long it would take to get investigators there. Maybe they didn't want to keep the body there for that long because they wanted to keep it in a cool place so it wouldn't decompose fast enough. The body could be preserved long enough for them to be able to investigate him and figure things out, you know. But I wish that he had authority, I wish he had authority to get people out so they wouldn't contaminate the crime scene. Now it's hard to really look for prints and stuff and see what could be, you know. It's hard. That evening, Brown's body was airlifted to Bagram. 2 days later, it arrived in a casket at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. And after a flag draped of loading was delivered a short drive away to the office of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner, the office and the coroner of the U.S. military and other federal agencies, responsible not only for performing autopsies on the dead, but also for carefully considering the evidence presented to it before rendering a solemn finding on the manner of death, preferably a choice among natural, accident, homicide, or suicide, and rarely and reluctantly undetermined or pending. Well, at least they have someone in the U.S. who's competent to perform the autopsy and determine how they died. Because in a foreign country, I guess it's much harder, especially in Afghanistan. But, I mean, I guess because there was no one there to personally do it, so they had to transport him. But you can still find out how they died, how they died, and hopefully, you know, even if you find out how someone died, it's hard to like really be able to solve the mystery, the total mystery of how the death came to be. We know how he died, but how it came to that point, it's hard. Brown's autopsy concluded with the obvious. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Okay, we know that much. Blood tests showed that Brown had enough of the sedative Valium in his system to render him incapable of coherent action. Okay, maybe he ingested Valium to help him sleep or something. It's not going to help you keep you awake, that's for sure. Or maybe someone gave it to him. We don't know. As for the manner of death, on May 15, 2008, 4 days after the event, a deputy medical examiner in Dover, Lieutenant Colonel Ladd Tremaine, officially declared Brown's death to be a suicide. So they're thinking he took the Valium and killed himself. He took the Valium and then shot himself. Because I guess the Valium would relax you enough that you can just shoot yourself without, you know, being too scared. The examiner had little information to go on, since the CID investigation in Afghanistan had barely begun. Really? Just now? I guess they're behind or they're lagging and doing their work. That sucks! But the ruling didn't seem to account for some of the physical evidence. High-resolution photographs of Brown's fully clothed body as it arrived in Dover show no signs of backspatter. Yeah, because if you commit suicide, you hit yourself, there should be spatters of blood. That's true. Backspatter is the automized blowback of blood from an entry wound caused by a high-velocity round fired in extremely close range. Exactly. And that's what would happen if you commit suicide. In Brown's case, with an entry wound on the right side, had the gun been fired as it was said to have been fired, stock down, muzzle up between his legs, crime scene experts would expect it to have been present, and it was not. Yeah, either way, you shoot yourself. I mean, even if he did it the way he did it, he wrapped it around his leg and then pulled the trigger and shot himself. It's like, in your head, but then how is their head? Well, maybe, you know, it could hit your temple and then go back here like that, if you do it that way. If you conk your head. Or if you have your head to the side, it could be like that too, depending. So it could go from here to here or from here to here, depending. The belief that Brown had killed himself was widely shared in Asadabad, even though not a single soldier who gave a statement after his death was aware of any recent difficulties he may have had. Those who knew him best thought of him as a goofy kid, quiet around his superiors, but relaxed and funny among his peers. Invigorated by a recent home leave, excited by a subsequent promotion, and looking forward to the successful conclusion of his army service for a few short years. His drug use, if they were being honest, was not exceptional. Valium was the way to get through the day. They were surprised that Brown had killed himself. They attributed it to be the unknowable in life and moved on. So, I guess some people use Valium to calm themselves in high-stress situations, and that's what you can get when you're in the army. And nobody thought anything of him taking it. Nobody thought maybe he took more than the recommended dose. That's true. And they didn't see any signs that he could be self-harming, and they just didn't know how it happened, and they just ruled it as we don't know, and they move on. Well, what can they do? They're not going to keep investigating this until they figure it out, because they have other things to do, unless they assign someone to do it, or assign a private investigator to come all the way from here to there to investigate and figure things out. Not so. Brown's mother, Sandra Evans. She lived in a trailer park with her second husband on the shores of Clear Lake in Northern California. Ooh, that's beautiful. She and her son were close. During his recent leave, they had spent a light-hearted week with friends and family, swapping stores and enjoying the pleasures of being together. Brown was open with her to a degree that he could not be with his father. Nonetheless, he waited until the very end of the visit to tell her what was on his mind. So he knew that it was going to happen. That's so sad to tell your mother that and then leave for deployment. Man, that's going to rack your mother's heart and brain forever. They were in her car, driving from Clear Lake to Sacramento Airport. Brown put on Bohemian Rhapsody, the operatic Queen song about a condemned man crying out to his mother. He said he did not want to go back to Afghanistan. He did not want to go back, but I guess in the army, you don't have a choice where you get assigned. His problem was not with the enemy, he explained, but rather with one of his sergeants, whom he described as a thug. He was being bullied by one of his sergeants. Brown told his mother the sergeant was running a drug ring, smuggling in prescription narcotics from Pakistan, selling them to American troops eager to tune out the war. He was making extra bank. And that's against army rule, but most people that are in high ranks don't ever get into trouble. If they do, it's like hush hush. Brown told his mother he had to make a mistake. He had let the sergeant co-opt him into being the courier who took the risk of acquiring the narcotics at the bazaar in the outer FOB, then carried the contraband past security into the inner FOB. Recently he had told the sergeant he wanted out. The sergeant had refused and had threatened him. If the sergeant doesn't kill you, maybe the sergeant killed him, but we don't know that. The sergeant had refused and had threatened him. Sandra Evans drove her son to the airport. He told her that he might not return alive. 2 weeks later, he was dead. See, he already knew he might not come alive, so I have a suspicion that the sergeant had something to do with it. But since Evans was tampered with all over the place over there, we know that they can find his print there anywhere. When CID agents... So here's the picture, and it shows from left the sergeant after photographing the scene. Armando Torres went downstairs to clear Brown's weapon alone. Specialist Aaron Cianfroccio's initial statement was lost. Torres said the thumb drive it was stored on has been corrupted. The deputy, Matthew Jackson, along with Torres, spent time on the scene unsupervised. I mean, yeah, if it was the sergeant who had done something, he wants to clean his tracks. And he wants to clean his tracks so nobody can pin it on him. And that sucks, because nobody will ever be responsible for his death. If it was someone else and it wasn't a suicide. When CID agents finally got to her door more than a month after Brown's death, Eve Evans says she told them about her son's account of a drug ring at the base, a domineering sergeant, a threat of violence, and a premonition of death. She rejected the medical examiner's finding of suicide not because she thought it was premature, but because she believed her son had been either killed accidentally or murdered. It could be one of the two. Anyone could have killed him. Maybe it was a sergeant because he wanted out, or maybe it was someone who saw him smuggling the drugs and wanted him to stop, but he couldn't. Or maybe he just had enough of it and he killed himself. It was just too much for him to handle, and he just didn't want to have to finish his time there doing that. But still, I mean, to kill yourself and not come home to your mother, that's just hard. Well, maybe he thought about it really hard, you know. From that day forward, the Army might have considered the possibility that Brown's demise was perhaps not a suicide. It have launched a rigorous investigation. Instead, as the files show, the Army disposed of the case expeditially, without following up on many key questions. Evans received some "We Share Your Sorrow" letters and a routine insurance payout, her share of which came to about $200,000. Yeah, that's a good payout, I guess. But, you know, it's not the money that is the thing, and it's not the "I feel your pain, I'm commiserating with you" kind of thing. It's you want to know the truth, and you want to know what actually happened to your son. But if nobody's going to fully investigate and question people and go through the whole story and go through the whole 9 yards and actually get you on it, or like call you, do the investigation and call out people for it, you know, it's, you know, most parents, that's what they want, but they don't always get it. It's just, that's the end of it, because they don't want to further investigate and open up a lot of things. They just want to close the case and say, yeah, well, it possibly could be, but we're sorry, and here's the money, and we're done, you know? Case closed. Evans did not know it at the time, but she had company. Hundreds of other non-combat deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan have been ruled to be suicides, leaving some families feeling isolated, powerless, and angry. Man, she's not the only one. They hush things up and just say suicide, suicide, suicide. So you think people who go in the Army who don't come back out, they're killing themselves because it's too much for them to handle what's happening here. And I mean, that ain't the truth. I'm telling you, that ain't the truth. You know, I can tell you that for sure. I have an ex who is in the Air Force, or was, and he did his tour in Afghanistan, and he came back. He didn't commit suicide. So, I mean, it's everybody who sees and goes through all this stuff. And like in that movie, American Soldier, he went through all this stuff, and he saw things that he can't unsee. But did he commit suicide? No. He ended up dying because someone with PTSD was trying to help kill him because of his deranged mind. Like Evans, they wonder whether other factors were at play, and whether other causes of death might have merited consideration. The common denominator is the family's bewilderment. The suicide took place without any warning signs, sudden self-destructive acts that could not have been foreseen and are not explained by the official findings. The precise numbers are unknowable. Some of the suicides must indeed have been authentic, despite what the families think. Suicide, not combat, is the leading cause of death among U.S. soldiers. Proving the CID wrong would require access to closely held files and expansive, painstaking research. Most military families lack the resources to challenge the official findings. Yep, Costs money to reopen cases because you have to do it with your own nickel and dime. And if you don't have your own nickel and dime to do it, you just leave it as is written. But the numbers we do now suggest that Army investigators are mishandling non-combat deaths in war zones, adding to the anguish of families whose loved ones died while serving their country. Since 2001, the U.S. military appears to have prosecuted only 5 soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq for the murder of fellow soldiers. At least they did some, but they want every. I know. During the same period, it has ruled the deaths of 362 soldiers to be suicides. That's a lot! Man, I don't think they were all suicides. That disparity by itself seems to indicate that something is amiss. A recent study in military medicine found that the suicide rate among U.S. civilians adjusted for age and gender is roughly comparable to that of soldiers. Yet among civilians, the suicide rate is only 2.5 times higher than the murder rate among soldiers in combat zones. The military is to be believed is roughly 70 times higher. And I'm telling you, it's not just suicide. There has to be others, because I mean, you would think that most of the deaths would be combat. And now this, really? Sandra Evans wanted answers. She fired off her first letter to the CID 20 days after her son's death, and never let up from there. Her letter writing campaign widened to include Senator Barbara Boxer. Oh, yeah. Hopefully she does something. President Obama, and many others. She did not represent herself well in the paper. Well, maybe she's not good at letter writing. She should have asked someone else to do it. But her anguish and skepticism were both real and legitimate. Well, of course, she wants answers to her son's death. In response to her entreaties, the Army gave her the brush off. The CID informed Evans that, because the investigation was active, no files could be released. She kept after it anyway. The investigation eventually morphed into a dead-end inquiry into the sale of narcotics at Asadabad. No charges were ever filed. The investigation was formally closed on February 8, 2009. So that's it? They didn't even investigate the drug ring and do anything about that? Really? Even Americans are bad. You say that the drug situation is just like, oh, it's Mexico, bring it into America, but look at what the Americans are doing in Afghanistan. Several months later, about a year after her son's death, the case file from the CID started trickling into Evans' trailer. They consisted largely of investigators' logs, along with sworn statements by soldiers on the scene. The file appeared to be disorganized and incomplete. They contained omissions, heavy reductions, and maddeningly, a large number of unexplored contradictions. For a few years, Evan and some of her son's fellow soldiers tried to make sense of it. Of course, fellow soldiers who were friends of Evans, they want to help her. They're on Evans' side. They're not on the side of the other nincompoops. In 2014, Culp and Evans finally met at a hotel near San Jose, California, after she kept at him for 16 months, week after week, until he agreed to see her. Their conversation was long and intense. By the end of it, Culp had agreed to take the challenge of sorting out the case files and to do it for free. Wow! For free? I wouldn't mind paying, but I said, just give me a payment plan here, and I'll just pay you every time I get my paycheck. I'll pay you something, $50. Eventually you'll get it paid off, but for free, wow, that's generous. He did not know what he was getting into. It took him more than 20 years to decipher all the paperwork and redactions. Oh, it took him more than 2 years to decipher all the paperwork and redactions. 20 years, 10. Damn if it took him 20 years, but it only took him 2. What he found, based on more than 24 witness statements collected by military investigators, their official 17-page report, and a full-scale recreation of the crime scene by independent forensics experts, raised disturbing question about the CID's investigation into Matthew Brown's death. See? They didn't do it properly, and then now he got people to do it properly, and man, holes everywhere, and when they figure out what, I don't know if they're going to, she just wants to know how it happened, but I don't know if they're going to be able to prosecute people or do anything further with their findings, but, you know, maybe she'll get closure. The Valium factor. Oh, what's that? Gun tower. Maybe I missed something in there. And 2 was investigation. 3 was the Valium factor. Okay. The Valium factor. Brown was born September 1st, 1987. Wow! He was born! He's just as old as me! Wow! He was born like 3 days before me. In San Diego after his mother went into labor at a McDonald's. His father was serving in the Navy at the time. Eventually the couple divorced. Sandra remained on the West Coast. Matthew and his younger sister moved with their father to Zelenople, Pennsylvania, an unadorned town about a half-hour north of Pittsburgh. His father became an engineer for the Federal Aviation Administration. Matthew was placed in special education programs because he was severely dyslexic. After graduating from high school in 2006, just like me! Well, I graduated in 2006 too, but I wasn't dyslexic. He joined the Army and eventually was posted to an artillery battery at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Cool. Brown was not a model soldier. He performed well in the field, but hated physical training and chafed at the discipline of garrison life. Of course, nobody likes physical training. Well, some people do, because it's like, nah, you can't compare it to gym training, really. It's a little more rigorous than that. He lived for the moment. He played video games. He had no sense for the value of time. He went AWOL twice, and both times binged on cocaine. His first absence lasted several weeks, until he tired of partying and reported for duty. His second absence took him to a construction job in Pennsylvania and lasted 3 months, until the local police grabbed him and skipped him back to Fort Bragg. The Army fined him, demoted him to a buck private, and gave him the choice of getting kicked out or shipping off to Afghanistan. He chose Afghanistan. Wow! If it was me, I'd try to get my way out of the Army if I didn't really want to be in the Army, and I'd just get a menial job. Wherever, if that's what I wanted to do. Or a regular job. I'm not saying menial, but just regular job. In December 2007, about 6 months before his death, Brown arrived at a large American fire base called Blessing, stood beside the Peck River among the Hindu Kush Mountains in a heavily contested valley. The role of Blessing's big guns was to pound the mountainside and provide fire support in defense of smaller outposts at risk of being overrun. There is no record of Brown ever having expressed an opinion about the mission or the larger purpose of the war. He was relatively happy at Blessing, which he considered to be an improvement over Fort Bragg, but he didn't stay long. In January 2008, he was transferred to a detail at the Field Detention Center FOB Asadabad. His barracks was partitioned with plywood into 5 individual bunk rooms, plus a common area furnished with a table, sofa, microwave, and TV. All of the residents worked at the detention center. Those in the lower ranks also had gun tower duties to perform. The things they bungled. A full-scale recreation of the third-floor room where Brown died, built by an independent forensics team, raised doubts about the military's investigation. And here's a picture of that. Of course! The military didn't do a proper investigation. And you're telling me they don't, you know, they cover things up too, just like any. 2 days before his death, Brown was promoted to private second class. Wow, he had a promotion before, so he couldn't have committed suicide. He should have been probably proud that he was doing better for himself. He was pleased. He told the sergeant who promoted him that he hoped to rise to the rank of specialist before leaving the army. He went to the chaplain and asked about the requirements to become a chaplain's assistant. Wow! So he's going in the right direction here. For once he was planning for the future. Oh, that's good. He borrowed a PlayStation 2 from a friend, promising to return it soon. He wanted to play a little. Have a little free time, just relax, kick back. For the midnight shift, the normal procedure was to place 2 guards in the gun tower so they could keep each other awake. On the eve of Brown's death, the 2 guards were friends, Jay Flannery and Aaron Sinfranco. Both were specialists, 2 ranks higher than Brown. Before going on duty that night, they saw Brown at the barracks. They knew he liked to sedate himself with Valium. Flannery thought he seemed out of it. He yelled at Brown, who had taken the 6 a.m. shift, to go to bed. Oh, he was out of it, and they told him that he should just go to bed, and they probably have somebody else watch. But I guess he decided and said he could do it. Maybe he took one too many Valium. See, I'm telling you. That had some effect on him, taking one too many Valium. That mixed with anything, not a good combination. At 5 a.m., Flannery called someone to rouse Brown. Brown got up, got dressed. Oh, well, I guess he slept a little bit because someone roused him, you know. I guess he went to bed when he was told to go to bed. Okay, then. Maybe he got like a couple hours of sleep, 4 to 6. At 5 a.m., Flannery called someone to rouse Brown. Brown got up, got dressed, and, with the right boot unlaced, made his way down the tower. A sergeant stopped him because he seemed drunk. Maybe he combined Valium and drinking? No, bad combination. Brown said that he had just woken up. The sergeant checked to see that his weapon was unsafe. Oh, I'm glad, 'cause you don't want that to go firing off in the mid-blast. He got close enough to sniff for alcohol and smelled none. Oh, okay. And maybe he wasn't drinking. And then he wasn't drinking because he couldn't smell the alcohol. Alright. Alright then, he's off the hook on that one. Brown continued toward the gun tower and got there about 5 minutes late. Well, stumbling. From the 3rd floor, Flannery and Cianfranco shouted at him to hurry the fuck up. They swore at him again when they passed him on the 2nd floor going down. As he was on his way up, he kept his head down, mumbled something, and went past them carrying his M4. He was evidently doped, far more than he had been the night before. Cianfranco declined to speak for this story, and Flannery did not respond to requests for comment. Okay, he doped himself one night, then he doped himself some more the 2nd night. He didn't have time to recover in between. That has real bad consequences, even if alcohol is not involved. Man, all that Valium, that's a recipe for you not to be able to watch the tower properly or realize what's going on. And if you take your gun off safety, and you could easily kill yourself too. But we're all saying that's not the case. And here, back where they were recreating the scene, I'm going back a bit. It says here that the bullet hole, the Army never performed a ballistics or trajectory study. Really? To figure out like how the bullet got to his head? Seriously? Man. The bench. The angle of the Brown's injury didn't match his position on the bench. He probably was placed in that position afterward, or he fell into that position. The weapon. An Army lab found no prints on the gun and didn't test it for DNA. You had to test the gun for DNA, man! Come on, Army people. See, they're not doing their investigation properly. And I watch enough Law and Order SVU to know how all this goes down. You can't fool me. The table. By miscalculating his dimensions, the CID skewed key findings. See? They were just doing a half-assed job, the CID, just to get through it and say, okay, fine, he killed himself. Damn ass CID. Okay. Continuing on. Flannery and Cianfranco caught a ride with the sergeant of the guard, happened to be passing by. When they got to the barracks, they dumped their gear and briefly discussed the situation. According to their subsequent sworn statements, the sergeant informed their superior, Sergeant First Class Armando Torres, the MP in charge of the detention center. The time was just after 6 a.m. At least they informed someone that Brown was inebriated from drugs. The next half hour is crucial to the story. The witness statements about events during that short period contain numerous contradictions that the CID investigators failed to explore in their report. What? Crucial part and they forgot? Oh! But for now, it is enough to bridge the complexities with a few unequivocal facts. Having dropped their gear at the barracks, Specialists Flannery and Cianfranco wound their way to the chow hall. They were there, having breakfast with Torres and his deputy, a staff sergeant named Matthew Jackson. A soldier hurried in around 6:30 and said there was an emergency in the gun tower. Torres and Jackson immediately left for the tower, arriving roughly 3 minutes later. Flannery and Cianfranco stayed behind to finish their meal. And of course, why would they need to go too? Well, they don't need enough people there. They just need sergeants to go. So they already knew. These people, they already knew that something was going to go down. When Torres and Jackson got to the gun tower, the third floor was occupied by the doctor and the medic. Although Torres had no training in such affairs, he seemed. Of course, he had no training of how to do it. Yeah, but the one in charge is to let the other person who knows how to do things take over. Come on. Now to place himself front and center. He asked Jackson to remain on the third floor to make sure that nothing was touched while he went off to retrieve a camera and report to the company commander. Brown sat dead on the bench, stiffening and leaking blood from his head. Really? Oh my God, you're supposed to pull him on the floor so he stops leaking blood and, you're not supposed to leave the evidence as it should be, I know, but... While Torres was gone, Lieutenant Faust, the cop from Virginia, showed up and took notes. The statement he later gave to the CID was that the most complete description provided, with a detail that stands out as especially significant. Faust observed a small hole in the plexiglass window well forward of Brown's body. Of all the witnesses, only Faust mentioned it. He characterized the hole as a fragmented and sketched its location on the window pane. It was the sort of hole that a 5.56 millimeter round from an M4 might have made. The CID never performed ballistics or trajectory studies. Subsequent examinations have suggested the hole was in a location unlikely to have resulted from a self-inflicted shot to the head from the muzzle-up weapon loosely strapped around Brown's left leg. I think they strapped it around his leg to make it look like a suicide, but then there was a gun there. There was a gun incision on the plexiglass, so someone must have shot directly from there to the other gun tower, There must have been. When Torres returned with the camera, Faust asked him to recuse himself and withdraw from the scene because of his close ties to the deceased. Standard police procedure. But Torres stayed, saying he had volunteered to Major Mayfield to photograph the scene. Faust told the other soldiers who were now milling around the third floor to leave until only he, Torres, and Mayfield remained. After Torres finished photographing the scene, Faust escorted him to the base of the tower. leaving only Mayfield inside. Faust put a soldier on guard and gave orders that no one was to enter the tower until the CID agents arrived. But his orders didn't carry any weight, and he left. See, people kept mulling inside, and nobody listened to him. See, that was the case. If you mess with the case, he should have been the one to stand there, and he should have given orders to that guy to deliver whatever. Torres was not the only military policeman at Sadabad. A group of MPs were helping provide security to provincial reconstruction teams. These were full-fledged policemen with crime scene training, not primarily jailers like Torres. On the morning of Brown's death, all of them had departed on mission except for one, a sergeant. When he heard the trouble, he grabbed his shoulder holster and ran to the tower. According to the CID report, when he got there, he was stopped by Torres, told him that his assistance was not required. Since Torres outranked him, the MP turned and went away. Man, you see, people of outside training to handle these types of situations need to be used, not, because of the military rank. Man, put military ranking aside in these cases. It's all... The company commander, a captain, had ordered Torres to secure Brown's living quarters and have Flannery and Cianfranco report to him. Torres found the two soldiers in the inner FOB and set them to see the captain. The captain told them to submit sworn statements. They typed them into a standard form on an army laptop, and Torres loaded the statements onto a thumb drive, which he retained. The time was 9 a.m. The CID investigators were still at Bagram. See? It takes forever for investigators to arrive, and time's a ticking. Torres' movement over the next few hours are unreported, but by 11:30, when medics strapped Brown on the bench to keep him from sliding into his own blood on the floor, Torres was present. A half hour later, when Mayfield arrived to remove the body, Torres followed him up to the third floor to assist with the job. Extracting Brown from the bench required that his weapon be removed from his leg. Mayfield took care of it, handed the weapon to Torres, and instructed him to switch its firing selector from semi to safe. Torres did more than that. Having rendered the weapon safe, he disappeared with it to the tower's second floor to clear it. Wearing rubber gloves, he dropped the magazine, ejected a round from the firing chamber, checked the chamber to verify that it was empty, reloaded the ejected round into the magazine, and clicked the magazine back into place. Investigators later questioned why he had taken the weapon to the second floor to clear it, explained that he wanted to minimize the risk to people on the floor above. This implied, implausibly, that clearing the weapon might cause it to fire. The investigators did not challenge his logic. You're not supposed to touch the evidence and tamper with it! Oh my gosh! Now all that is gone. I think he was trying to do some sneaky thing on his own accord. Torres returned Brown's MP to the third floor. 3 months later, long after the medical examiner had ruled the death a suicide, an Army forensics laboratory in Georgia found no fingerprints on the weapon. It's impossible to know whether anyone had wiped the rifle down. It was not tested for DNA. Brown's hands were found to have no gunpowder residue on them. So that means Brown did not shoot himself, or there would be gunpowder residue. And I believe you me, they wiped it clean. I'm positive. According to Jackson's sworn statement, he and Torres had lunch. And contrary to common sense and crime scene norms, they returned to the gun tower and spent 15 minutes inside alone. Jackson said they looked for the bullet and ricocheted marks. They did not say why. To any competent investigator, the statement alone should have set off alarms. The CID agents never followed up on it, and Torres never mentioned the visit at all. Torres and Jackson declined to comment for the story. I think they were just trying to cover up all evidence here and just rule him out as suicide. Drug ring. The CID agents arrived around 2 p.m. on the day of Brown's death. There were 2 of them. Their names had been blacked out in the files. Torres was the first person with direct involvement that they spoke to. He informed them that Brown had shot himself. He said that he had taken pictures, that Brown's body had been removed, that his weapon had been cleared, and that the crime scene had been disturbed by medical personnel. He had also said, incorrectly, that he was the only MP currently on the base. Really? So they're really trying to get away with something more that happened than just suicide. The agents got to the gun tower at 2:45, and for the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, they performed a detailed examination of the third floor, including mapping of the locations of the blood and gore, and taking measurements of the gun table, the chair, and the window. Nothing in the room was supposed to escape their attention. They were unable to find the bullet or fragments of it, even when they returned the following morning with a metal detector. In retrospect, on some of the simplest matters involved in detailing a crime scene, they made fundamental errors. They got the dimensions of the gun table wrong. This was an important miscalculation, because it allowed for subsequent miscalculations to stand. Furthermore, when the agents came to the hole in the plexiglass window that Lieutenant Faust clearly described as fragmented, one of them wrote, "Based upon the point of impact, possible trajectory of the projectile, the size of the hole in the plexiglass, and the lack of cracks or stress marks around the hole, it did not appear as though the hole was made by small arms round." That was it. They never returned to the subject, even after Faust, their fellow policeman, submitted his observations. 10 years later, under pressure from James Culp, the CID produced photographs from the files that clearly showed a fractured and splintered hole. Man! Things that never went done keep coming to light when private investigators are dealing with this. Man, this is sad. Who knows what else goes on there in the Army. After inspecting the tower, the agents went to Brown's quarters, a scene that had been secured by Torres. There, in a plastic bag, they found 12 empty blister packs, each of which had contained 10 milligram pills of Valium manufactured by Roche Pharmaceuticals of Pakistan. The discovery was significant. This was a high-quality industrial product that was coming across the nearby border, and it suggested access to more than an artisanal level of Pakistani narcotics. 3 more blister packs appeared during a second search the following afternoon. That should be a cause for alarm. The military suspected that someone at the base was providing soldiers with an ample supply of drugs. Later that year, Culp was told the CID formally named 2 unidentified soldiers as suspects in a drug operation at Asadabad. Finally! After one of the soldiers invoked his right to legal counsel, however, initiative was dropped. What? Man! Cases get dropped left and right. Like I said, they sweep things under the bush. The optics would certainly have been bad for the Army. Obviously. Asadabad as a straight point for Pakistani narcotics, flowing unchecked to U.S. troops throughout Afghanistan. On the base, Valium abuse was so widespread that a few months after Brown's death, Culp learned all 120 soldiers in the battery were quietly pulled from their individual barracks and forced to sleep in open space, to deprive them from privacy for the remainder of their tour. As often occurs, the Army preferred to avoid embarrassment rather than identify and prosecute the perpetrators. See, they just want to go ahead with their punishment instead of saying who's at fault and get this all cleared up and taken care of, I mean, really? Not all of them want to. Some of them are like, can't we just, But if nobody's going to back them up, they can't really just keep going and saying their case. However, Matthew Brown died. The existence of a drug ring at Asadabad could have provided a motive to kill. He was unreliable, a whiner who wanted out, a courier who knew all sides, a kid getting high on his own supply. On the morning of his death, his condition at the gun tower could have landed him in the hospital, where questions would have been raised and he might have begun to talk. Well, of course, because they reported him, someone would have taken him to the hospital, most certainly. And and he would have talked and said what happened because he wants out, but someone didn't want that to happen. They didn't want him to speak. So someone killed him, for sure. None of this proves that Brown was murdered. The inner life of even the closest to us can be secret. Some people commit suicide without warning, leaving their families bewildered. It is completely possible that Brown took his own life. It is possible that everything Brown told his mother about the drug ring was untrue. That Torres and Jackson were guilty of nothing more than inadvertently violating standard crime scene protocols. The point is not that we know Brown was killed. The point is that we cannot be certain how he died, because the CID investigators seem barely to have considered any possibility other than suicide, even after they stumbled upon evidence of a drug problem at Asadabad. The greatest concerns appeared to be Brown's habitual drug use and the strange disappearance of his wallet. It was not found after careful searches of his quarters and the tower, as well as 2 searches of his body. Yet it mysteriously materialized inside the body bag after it arrived at Bagram. Had someone been worried about what it might contain? Jackson had accompanied Brown's corpse on the flight from Asadabad. The investigators questioned him but drew no larger conclusion, ultimately shrugged it off. Later, when Senator Barbara Boxer inquired about the missing wallet, the Army told her incorrectly that the CID agents had found it as soon as they had arrived at Asadabad. So they told her false information? Gosh. But, maybe someone found it later or was holding on to it and put it in there because, they're like, well, we don't want them to find out what he's hiding, and we don't want, they don't want the truth to come out, and they don't want things to go AWOL over there. They just want to keep their drug ring intact. I'm sure of it. But we'll never know what happened because evidence was tampered with, the CID didn't do their job properly. It's scary when drugs are involved. On that day, several significant scraps of evidence came to light. From additional questioning, for instance, it became clear that the use of narcotics on the base was far more common than it had at first been acknowledged in written statements. Had the CID fully investigated the implications, it might have come to a more thorough and convincing explanation of Brown's death, even if it was a suicide. Instead, the investigators caught a flight out that evening, leaving behind an unfinished job and questions that remain to this day. See, they did a terrible job. They did what they could for that day, and then they left. They left that same day. They came late that day, and they did what they did, and they left that evening. It's like they didn't really care to do a great job. They did a half-assed job. And I'm sorry for the length of this video, but there's a lot to cover here, and it's a very interesting story to me. Even more troubling, the sworn statements are full of material omissions and contradictions when it comes to where the 4 main witnesses were during the critical half hour between 6 a.m. when Flannery and Cianfrocco left the tower, and 6:30 a.m. when a soldier rushed into the chow hall with news of Brown's death. Jackson, for example, stated that Torres was with him in the chow hall continuously from 6 until 6:40. According to him, when Flannery and Cianfrocco joined them for breakfast around 6:15, they told Torres that Brown had been late for duty, but failed to mention that he was also high on drugs while on guard duty in the gun tower, a serious security threat. What? That's important news! They need to report to people! They just say, oh, he was late. They need to report that he's a threat at his job, He can't competently do his job by watching, securing the tower because he's high. Flannery gave 2 accounts of the same story. The first was contained in the sworn statement gathered by Torres. Flannery stated that he and Cianfrocco spotted Torres in the chow hall and informed him of Brown's tardiness in appearance, and that Torres said he would check on Brown after he finished his breakfast. The second was a different version that Flannery gave the following day, directly to the CID. It adds what turns out to be an important detail. On the way to the chow hall, he and Cianfranco briefly stopped by the base's recreation center, known as the MWR, to get some information from the internet. He stated that they then proceeded to the chow hall, where they joined Jackson and Torres for breakfast, omitting any mention of Brown at all. Really? I thought they would at least say something, not just that he was late. But of course, maybe they didn't want to get him into trouble or something. They were going to check on him after they ate. But when everybody rushed over there, they had no more reason to go there as well, you know. We do not know the content of Cianfranco's initial statement for a simple reason. It was in the thumb drive retained by Torres, who later told investigators that it had been corrupted. In his statement to the CID, however, Cianfranco said that he and Flannery stopped by the recreation center to look up the workout of the day on the fitness site. They then proceeded to the chow hall, where they were waiting for their eggs to finish when Torres walked in around 6:25, not just after 6, as Jackson testified. According to Cianfranco, he informed Torres of Brown's tardiness and actions, and Torres answered that he would go to the tower after breakfast. Cianfranco testified that he, Flannery, and Torres then sat down with Jackson, who was already there, and started talking about the normal daily randomness that people do. Despite Brown's seriously impaired condition in the tower, the CID did not challenge the assertions. Okay, well, he just wanted to talk to him about why he was tardy, apparently, and then that whole thing would come to light, and it would be dealt with at that time. But, you know, they didn't mention it ahead, so he had no way of knowing. It is hard to understand why a timeline that should have been simple became so complicated. The CID failed to resolve even the most glaring contradictions in the accounts of the 4 main witnesses. When Flannery and Cianfranco described their brief visit to the recreation center, the MWR, they both omitted a crucial fact. Torres was there, too. Torres stated so on the first line of his sworn testimony. At approximately 6:15 SPC, Cianfranco notified me at the MWR that PV2 Brown was late to the gun tower 2 days in a row. This means that Torres, by his own account, had not been where the other witnesses claimed he was that morning. It also implies that Cianfranco and Flannery informed Torres only that Brown was late, not that he was severely incapacitated while on guard duty. Once again, the CID seems simply to have accepted this, despite Cianfranco's sworn statement that he and Flannery had just concluded in the barracks that they had to search out Torres and inform him of Brown's condition. The CID also failed to establish Torres' movement between the rec center and the chow hall, where he was having breakfast when word of the emergency arrived around 6:30. So it only was alerted to them after someone was bringing him breakfast, had to tell him about all of the going downs. There is one more statement that requires explanation. A soldier in the barracks, Specialist Michael Merritt, told the CID that Flannery and Cianfranco woke him up around 6:10. They were loudly discussing Brown's incapacitation. 10 minutes later, around 6:20, 10 minutes before news of Brown's death arrived at the chow hall, Torres appeared in the barracks and ordered Merritt to prepare for unscheduled guard duty because Brown had killed himself. Oh. So they were just gonna clean the place and then say, okay, now it's your turn. Really? Well, someone had to watch the tower. Well, they didn't really do that. They waited for the CID. But he had to stand guard outside, you know. Merritt's statement was missing from the file acquired by Sandra Evans. It appeared only recently, a decade after it was made. If the timing in his account is accurate, it would mean that Torres knew of Brown's death before he entered the chow hall for breakfast, and before news of the emergency subsequently arrived. But it is impossible to know from the files, and that is the larger issue now. The CID's failure to examine the contradictions and omissions of key witnesses defies understanding. It indicates a profound institutional breakdown, one that casts serious doubt on the military's ability to conduct thorough, objective investigations to the death of U.S. soldiers overseas. I bet he had something to do with it, and that his implications implications are there, but without proper investigation, I guess that will never be known, and he gets to walk away from all of this. The CID also bungled some of the most basic physical evidence surrounding Brown's demise. Leaving aside Brown's incapacitation, it has also been difficult to visualize how exactly he was supposed to have shot himself. He was sitting on an elevated bench, in front of an elevated table, built with an elevated footrest on which his feet were placed. The weapon was between his legs. It was found muzzle up, with the stock either on the floor or the footrest and the strap wrapped loosely around his left leg. Because it was underneath the table, the weapon was angled back toward Brown's seated position. The bullet entered his right temple forward of his right ear, and exited the left rear part of his head before proceeding on to the same straight trajectory, either up to the ceiling where it was ricocheted or straight to the wall or plexiglass window. Once all of the physical evidence was mapped for forensic experts, it seemed unlikely or impossible that Brown could have contorted himself in such a way to make all of this work. The CID never did the calculations. Of course, they did a half-assed job and never calculated it. So it clearly states that he couldn't have killed himself. We know that for a fact. Earlier this year, a decade after Brown's death, a forensics company called Visual Evidence tried to piece the puzzle together. Visual Evidence is based in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. It is in the legal support business and offers a variety of services, including crime scene recreations that can withstand cross-examination in court. The company and its co-founder, Manfred W. Treubner, decided to take on the Brown injury pro bono. Wow, that's nice of them. Having heard about Sandra Evans' quest from a forensics and blood spatter expert who was looking into the case, working with the CID's measurements, his team built a full-scale replica of the death scene, including the elevated bench and table, the plexiglass window, and the blood stains on the walls and ceiling. They used a replica M4 carabine and various lasers and aiming devices. At the same time, they began to produce computer-generated images of the possible ballistics. They did not set out to prove a theory, to explain the physical realities of the death scene as best as it could be reconstructed. I'm glad there are a lot of people helping Sandra Evans. She needs to get justice and know exactly what happened. As they progressed, it began to seem the only way to duplicate the shot that fit the evidence provided was to have a surrogate Brown rest his head on the table, as if unconscious, with a shot being fired by someone else from an angle that Brown could not have achieved. Some important questions remained unanswered. In the small concrete room, why had no bullet or bullet fragment been found? And what was the cause of the hole in the plexiglass window? Given the dimensions of the gun table, the hole appeared to be too far forward to have resulted from any of the possible trajectories. Nonetheless, visual evidence began to lean toward a conclusion of murder. Yay! They're getting closer to finding out what happened. Or what they think happened, should I say. A scenario that fit the laboratory reconstruction was this. A killer came up the stairs in the rear of the room, observed Brown pass down in Valium with his head on the table, retrieved Brown's weapon from somewhere in the room, racked around into the chamber, switched the selector from safe to semi, placed the muzzle against Brown's head from a position slightly below and to the right, and fired a single round. Brown slumped to the left against the wall. In this scenario, the killer would then have to put Brown's left leg through the strap, lower the weapon stock onto the floor, and immediately depart. It would have been a sloppy plan, hastily executed. If that is what happened, the salvation for the killer was that the CID was even sloppier. Man, this was an easy get. The CID was sloppy, but at least now they know. Now they know that someone killed him. It's not suicide. But I just wanted to throw it off as such. Circling the wagons. CID investigators are the only federal agents who do not go through rigorous training at one of the federal law enforcement centers. Instead, they join the Army, serve as MPs for at least a year, then get 16 weeks at the MP School for Special Agents. Although they do not draw formal conclusions about the crime they investigate, they inevitably make assumptions that shape the gathering of evidence. Like all law enforcement agents, they feel pressed for time. Suicides are faster and easier than murders to resolve. In a war zone, they are relatively easy to stage. Oh, I see. I see what it is. I mean, they should get paid or time to investigate it properly and get more formal training, etc. I thought the Army was good for it. I thought they were good for that. Goes to show. As a practical matter, grieving families have no recourse once the military rules a death a suicide. Oh, that's so sad. Not once over the first 16 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq did the CID reverse itself and reopen a suicide investigation in either country. Unlike civilian police departments, it does not have an internal affairs division. It has a formal quality assurance program to review the performance of investigations, to little avail. Theoretically, it is subject to review by the Pentagon's Inspector General's office. When sufficient political pressure is brought to bear, such reviews are performed, but any resulting criticism or recommendations are freely ignored. In 2015, for instance, the IG issued a scathing report criticizing the agents who had investigated an accusation of sexual assault and recommended that the investigation be reopened, and the CID flatly refused to do so. There were no consequences. That's not fair! There should be more consequences for these kinds of things and people to get justice. Oh well. Last spring, thanks to the indefatigable attention that Attorney James Culp has paid to Matthew Browd's case, the CID agreed to a meeting to hear him out. The original files were brought in for the occasion. They included crime scene photographs that had previously been kept under wraps. The meeting took place over 5 hours on the afternoon of April 12th at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. The CID was represented by 2 agents and a lawyer. Culp was joined by experts from visual evidence, who were teleconferenced from the crime scene reconstruction in Ohio. At least they're willing to listen to Culp. I'm so grateful for this. That they actually stayed there for the 5 hours to hear it all out. The meeting did not go well. Culp felt that the senior CID agent adopted a patronizing tone, lecturing him on the messiness of perceptions and unreliability of eyewitnesses. For every question Culp raised, the agent offered a dismissive answer. He did, however, confirm that the CID had failed to conduct a quality assurance audit of the investigation, rendering its process and findings even more suspect. What's more, the new crime scene photographs shared by the CID revealed that the original investigators had grossly miscalculated the dimensions of the elevated table in the gun tower, overstating its depth by 18 inches. This meant that Brown had been sitting 18 inches forward of the position that visual evidence had been working with. When the company's technicians rearranged the mock-up in Ohio to reflect the new information, they found that Brown's entry and exit wounds now lined up precisely with the splintered hole in the window. So, they're mad that they're being scrutinized, but then they're like, oh, we see now. CID called Sandra Evans and informed her that the investigation was being reopened. At first glance, the news was heartening, but Culp was wary. After decades of experience with CID, he suspected that the investigation might be a ploy meant to deflect criticism and justify the original finding of suicide. In fact, the CID closed the reinvestigation only after 4 weeks, declined to discuss whom it had interviewed or what it had found, saying only that Brown's mother was free to request the files under the Freedom of Information Act. These files will, of course, be redacted. Only 4 weeks? That's sad, but they did at least something was done, and when she gets those files, she'll have help to review them again, and we'll keep going until, something is set in stone or satisfies her and gives her peace. The missing statement. In response to 40 written questions I had submitted, the CID acknowledged that it had not offered immunity to any witnesses during the reinvestigation, nor administered any polygraph tests. What? It should do all of the above! Its reason was circular. None of the witnesses, it said, was suspect of a crime. It reported that the investigators had concluded that the original finding of suicide was correct. It said that Sandra Evans never told them that her son feared for his life, only that he had been pressured to transport drugs to the base. It defended the original investigation with a string of evasions and patently false assertions, insisted that visual evidence had determined that the bullet's trajectory was consistent with a suicide, when the opposite was true, and claimed that Torres' original photographs of the crime scene had included the hole in the plexiglass window when they had not. It said that the hole had been there prior to the incident and was used by soldiers as a finger hold to open and close the window, but proved no evidence for that conclusion. In citing privacy requirements, the CID refused to answer the last 24 of my questions, of all of which pertained to its failure to follow up on the contradictions and omissions in the statements provided by Torres, Jackson, Cianfranco, and Flannery. Signed off with, none of the questions you presented would change the final determination of suicide in the investigation. So now credible information is found or presented, CID stands ready to do whatever it needs to pursue the credible information. Really? They're just gonna stand by what they deem, and they don't care what other people have to, say about it. That's not fair. It's so sad. She's not gonna get justice, and she's just gonna fight for the rest of her life. It's sad. This was boilerplate, the same language that the CID had used for years, to brush off the inquiries of bereaved families and agency critics. Most of these cases had subsided into obscurity, leaving the families exhausted and alone. One, however, remains widely unknown. In 2005, Lavenna Johnson, a 19-year-old private first class, died of a gunshot to the head on a base in Iraq. Johnson's death was found to be a suicide, but her father saw her body. After her father saw her body, however, he questioned the findings. She was right-handed, but the entry wound was on the left side of her head. She had a black eye, a broken nose, and teeth that had been shoved in. Most disturbingly, her vagina had been severely burned with chemicals. Johnson's father was a PhD and worked for the Army for decades. He began a vigorous campaign to gain full access to the files and to persuade the CID to reopen the investigation. Look at all of the things that happened to her. Her teeth, her bruise, her vagina. And you're going to tell me, oh, she must have been hurt, but then because of all that, she committed suicide due to it. No, someone killed her after doing all of that. It can't just be easy answer like that. But at least he was in the Army, so he knows how they do things, and maybe he can get them to further make it. But we'll see what happens. It's hard with these people. The CID obstructed him at every step along the way. Johnson sought help from his congressman, William Lacey Clay, who in an open session of the House Oversight Committee dressed down the CID commander, Brigadier General Rodney Johnson. Clay was irate. Dr. and Mrs. Johnson have been trying to get the truth about what happened to their daughter, he said. Unfortunately, they have been met by a wall of disrespect, evasion, and failure, and a failure to provide them with the answers that the parents of any fallen soldiers deserve. The general answered that he was not aware of the Freedom of Information request filed by the Johnsons, but that any such request would be handled appropriately in due time. The same general commanded that CID 3 years later, when Matthew Brown died. Today, more than 13 years after Lavenna Johnson's death, her parents' push for a reopened investigation has led to nothing. See, they don't want to. They just want to push things under the rug and say it was a suicide when it really wasn't, because they don't want to take responsibility. Period. They don't want to take responsibility for what really happened. They're covering their own. By an odd coincidence, soon after the reinvestigation into Matthew Brown's death was closed, Culp received a copy of the missing statement by Michael Merritt, in which he testified that Torres had known about Brown's suicide before he was notified of it in the chow hall. Merritt had left the Army and lives in Florida. Culp got through to him easily by phone and told him that the reinvestigation had come and gone. This was news to Merritt, who said that no one from the CID had contacted him. If they had, he would have learned that what Merritt volunteered to Culp, that he had kept a daily diary in Afghanistan, and that he has that diary still, and that it contains notes expressing confusion about certain aspects of Brown's death. See, he too is advocating for the same thing, for justice, but, the CID didn't want to question him because they didn't want to press further this investigation. They just wanted to close it and say it was a suicide. According to Merritt, Jackson ordered him to stand guard at the base of the gun tower around 7:45 a.m. He was present when Brown's body was removed, and was still there when Torres and Jackson returned around 12:15 p.m. and entered the tower alone. Merritt thought their visit was odd, and wondered what the purpose was. They were still inside 45 minutes later, when Merritt was relieved by Cianfranco and Flannery. In his official statement, Jackson had said that he and Torres had been inside the guard tower for 15 minutes. Now we have Merritt recalling that the visit was at least 3 times longer than that. It is hard to know what to make of this. The CID had made nothing of it at all, because it never bothered to ask. Its failure to contact Merritt earlier this year proves that nothing has changed. The reinvestigation was shoddy and incomplete as the original inquiry. Of course, they were there probably cleaning up the mess or hiding evidence or tampering with something, in my opinion. That's why they were there for that long. Or talking to each other about their story and what they were going to tell the CID and the people, Soldiers who die in combat zones deserve, at the very least, a competent investigation into the cause of their deaths. But given the insultry of the military, it seems unlikely that the CID will suddenly decide to reform itself. In theory, the FBI could step in and open investigations on behalf of deceased soldiers into violations of their civil rights, as it often does when local authorities fail to adequately pursue justice in civilian deaths. To do so, however, it would first need its coroner to raise the possibility of an incorrect finding. Its coroner is the Armed Forces Medical Examiner. Yeah, I'm not sure if they want to do that, but I think they should. The warrior creed is said to be leave no soldier behind, and combat commanders generally strive to live up to that. But the Army is large and bureaucratic, and Matthew Brown, like an unexamined number of other soldiers, has been abandoned. He may have killed himself, he may have been murdered, short of accepting the CID's authority. There is no way to know, and because of that, his fate is a national disgrace. It is, like many other soldiers, a national disgrace what happened to him, and in my opinion, I say CID needs to be reformed. They need to reopen cases. The coroner needs to help them, needs to help the FBI do so, and get justice for all these families, because he didn't commit suicide. He killed him. Someone killed him. And with that other girl, she didn't kill herself. Someone killed her. Someone killed her. Someone did brutal things to her and then killed her. And it's so sad that they will never formally get justice, but in the end, God will rule and take justice on them. Rest in peace. Be safe and rest in peace, everyone. This concludes this episode. Sorry for its length. There's a lot to cover. Please comment, like, and subscribe to my channel. And check out the links below of what Stefanie and I are selling below. Maybe you'll be interested to buy something. Thank you and have a nice day.